Hello everybody, today we're going to be reading Bad Dad by David Walliams.
Dads come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. There are
fat ones,
and
thin ones, tall ones,
and
short ones.
There are
young ones
and
old ones, clever ones
and
stupid ones.
There are
silly ones
and
serious ones, loud ones
and
quiet ones.
Of course, there are
good dads
and
bad dads.
This is the story of a dad and his son.
Frank
is the son. Dad is the dad. His name is
Gilbert.
This is
Rita.
Frank's mum.
Auntie Flip
is Dad's aunt. She babysits Frank sometimes.
Mr. Big
is a surprisingly small crime boss. Whatever time of day it is, he wears silk pyjamas and a dressing gown with velvet slippers monogrammed Mr. B. Mr. B has two henchmen, Fingers and Thumbs.
Fingers
is so called for his long, thin fingers, perfect for picking pockets.
Thumbs
has enormous thumbs that he uses to inflict terrible pain on Mr. Big's enemies.
Will
and
Bear
are Thumbs' fearsome nephews.
Chang
is Mr. Big's sinister butler.
Reverend Judith
is a vicar.
Sergeant Scoff
is the local policeman.
Mr. Swivel
is a one-eyed prison guard.
Judge Pillar
is well known for having a heart of stone.
Raj
is a newsagent.
Chapter 1 Rawr!
Roar went Dad's car as it sped around the dirt track. Frank's father was a banger racer. It was a dangerous sport. Cars would smash into each other, bang, wallop, crunch, as they zoomed round and round. Dad raced an old Mini that he had souped up himself. He had painted a Union Jack on the car and named her Queenie after a lady he admired, Her Majesty the Queen. The car became as famous in racing circles as Dad. Queenie's engine made an unmistakable sound like a lion. Dad was king of the track. He was the greatest banger racer the town had ever seen. People came from all over the country to watch him race. Nobody won more times than him. Week after week, month after month, year after year, Dad would lift the trophies above his head as the crowds cheered and shouted his name. Gilbert the Great! Gilbert the Great! Gilbert the Great! Gilbert the Great! Life was golden. Because Dad was a local hero, everyone wanted to know him. Whenever he took his son out for pie and mash, the owner of the shop would give them double helpings and then wouldn't let them pay a penny. If Frank was walking down the street with his father, people in cars would beep their horns, beep, beep, and smile and wave. The boy always felt a burst of pride whenever that happened. Frank even got marked up on a test by his maths teacher after the man got a photo taken with his father at parents' evening. No one was a bigger fan of Dad than his own son. The boy worshipped his father. He was a hero to him. Frank longed to be just like his dad one day, a champion race car driver. His dream was to one day drive Queenie. As you might expect, father and son looked alike. Both were short and round, with sticky-out ears. The boy looked like someone had put his dad into a shrinking machine. All of the children at his school, Frank knew he was never going to be the tallest, or the handsomest, or the strongest, or the cleverest, or the funniest. But he had seen the magic and wonder his father could create with his skill and courage on the racetrack. More than anything, he wanted to taste that. As for Dad, he forbade his son from watching him race. A night would start with 20 cars speeding round the track. and by the end there would be just one car still standing. Drivers often got badly injured in the pile-ups, and sometimes spectators did too if the cars crashed into the stands. "It's dangerous, mate," said Dad. Gilbert always called his son mate. They were father and son, but best friends too.
"But, Dad,"
the boy would plead as his father tucked him up in bed. "No buts, mate. I don't want you to see me get hurt."
"But you're the best. You'll never get hurt."
I said no buts. Now come on, be a good boy. Give us a huggle and go to sleep. Dad would always plant a kiss on his son's forehead before he went out to race for the night. As for Frank, he would close his eyes and pretend to be asleep. However, as soon as he heard the door close, he would creep out of bed and crawl down the hallway to the front door so as not to alert his mum. The woman would always shut herself in her bedroom and speak in hushed tones on the telephone whenever her husband was out of the house. Still dressed in his pajamas, the boy would run all the way to the racetrack. Just outside the stadium was a huge tower of rusty old cars that had been smashed up in previous races. Frank would climb to the top of the pile. There he had the best view of the race. The boy would sit cross-legged on the roof of the highest car and watch all the bangers speed by. Every time his father's Mini Queenie zoomed past, roaring as she went, the boy would cheer.
"Go, Dad, go!"
Dad had no idea his son was up there. The man barred his son from watching him race because he feared the worst might happen. One night it did.
Chapter 2. Out of Control.
The night of the accident, there seemed to be something badly wrong with Dad's car from the start. Instead of the Mini's distinctive roar, today the engine was making a loud grinding noise, as if it was about to explode. As soon as Dad threw Queenie into gear on the start line, the car lurched forward in stops and starts like a bucking bull. That fateful night, Frank was sitting on top of the pile of cars just outside the stadium, as he always did. It was in the depths of winter, and wind and rain swirled around him. Despite being soaked to the skin, the boy never wanted to miss a race. Something was wrong that night. Very wrong. As soon as the flag waved to start the race, Dad struggled to control his own car. Tonight there was no roar from the Mini's engine, rather that grinding noise. A deathly hush descended on the crowd. Frank felt sick to his stomach. Suddenly there was a huge explosion from Queenie's exhaust pipe. "Bang!"
"Dad!"
shouted the boy. From all that distance the man couldn't hear his son, especially over the thunder of all the other cars' engines. Frank desperately wanted to help, to do something, anything, but he was powerless to stop what was about to happen. The Mini sped up dramatically and then wouldn't slow down. It was out of control. Zoom! The art of racing motor vehicles is knowing when to go fast and when to go slow. Immediately, Dad was taking the corners far too quickly. This wasn't what a champion banger racer did. Frank's heart was thumping in his chest. Queenie's brakes must have gone. But how? Dad would always check and recheck his car before every race. Suddenly, Queenie swerved sharply to avoid a head-on collision with a Ford Capri, but the Mini was going far too fast, and as it turned, it rolled over and over and over. Boom, boom, boom. Dad's car was now upside down in the middle of the track. The Jaguar behind smashed into the Mini, sending the car flying through the air. It crashed to the ground again. Bam! Smashing it to pieces.
"No, Dad, no!"
shouted Frank from the top of the tower of cars. Down on the track there was a mighty pile-up as the cars couldn't stop in time. Smash! bang, crash. There was the sound of metal crunching into metal and glass smashing. Kaboom! One of the cars exploded into a fireball.
No!
Shouted Frank. The boy raced down the tower of cars and ran through the crowds to his dad's car. An air ambulance hovered overhead before landing on the track. Frank held his father's hand through the wreckage as the firemen tried to cut him out of the car. "What are you doing here, mate?" Dad whispered. "You should be at home in bed."
I'm sorry, Dad,
replied Frank. "I'm going to need the biggest huggle when I'm out of this."
Everything's going to be all right, Dad, I promise.
But it was a promise the boy couldn't keep.
Chapter 3. Crushed in the Crash. Nino, 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 Nino.
Frank held his father's hand as the ambulance raced to the hospital. The man's right leg had been completely crushed in the crash, and he was losing a lot of blood. "Mr. Goody," began the doctor as soon as Dad had been rushed into the accident and emergency department at the hospital, "I have some very bad news. We have to amputate your leg." "Which one?" replied Dad, not losing his sense of humour at this dark time. "The right one, of course. If we don't operate straight away, there is a very real chance you will die."
I don't want you to die, Dad,
said Frank. "It's all right, mate. I'm good at hopping." As Dad was immediately taken down to the operating theatre, Frank tried and tried to call his mother, but the line was engaged for hours. The operation took all night. Frank paced up and down the waiting area, unable to sleep. When his father came to from the anaesthetic in the morning, his son was the first person he saw when he opened his eyes. "Mate, you're the best," whispered Dad. It was clear he was in a lot of pain.
I am so pleased you made it, Dad,
replied Frank. "Of course. I didn't want to miss seeing you grow up. Where's your mother?"
I don't know, Dad. I called and called her last night, but I couldn't get through.
"She'll come." It was a couple of hours until she did. "Oh, Gilbert," she said upon seeing him, and burst into tears. The family reunion was brief, though, as she didn't stay that long. Gilbert was in hospital for months, but his wife's visits to his bedside became less and less frequent, and shorter. However, the nurses set up a little camp bed for Frank, and the boy slept by his father's side every single night. One day the doctors came in with a wooden leg for Gilbert. It fitted him perfectly. Within days he learned to walk again and insisted on walking all the way back to their block of flats from the hospital. "I can still do everything," said Dad proudly. He walked with a limp, and Frank held his hand the whole way, but they got home eventually. When they arrived back at the flat, Mum wasn't there. She had left a note on the kitchen table. It read, "To Frank and Gilbert, I am sorry, Rita."
Chapter 4. Hard-Faced Men. What does it mean, Dad?
asked Frank.
Why is she sorry?
"Because she has left."
She's not coming back?
"No.
Why?
Your mum has gone to live in a big house with a small man."
But
"I'm sorry, Frank. I tried my best for her, but my best wasn't good enough."
I'm sorry, Dad.
"I need a huggle."
Me too.
Father and son held on to each other tight, and they cried and cried until they could cry no more. To his credit, Dad never said anything bad about his wife, or by this time, ex-wife. But Frank felt deeply hurt that his mother had left without even saying goodbye. Even though she now lived in a huge house, Mum never invited her son to stay, not once. When she forgot her son's birthday for the second year in a row, Frank was in no hurry to see his mother again. Weeks and months passed by without any contact, and then it became unthinkable to call her, so he never did. Frank never stopped thinking about her, however. It was confusing because as much as she'd hurt him, Frank still loved her. Dad lost so much after the crash, not just his leg, but his wife too. Soon he was about to lose something else dear to him, his job. Gilbert loved being a banger racing driver. It was all he'd dreamed of from when he was a boy. Despite his pleas, the track owners banned him from racing ever again. They blamed him for the accident and never wanted to see him back on the track. What's more, they told him it wasn't safe for him to race cars with only one leg. So Dad tried and tried to get a different job, any job, but jobs in the town were scarce, and a man with a wooden leg always found himself at the bottom of the pile. Dad was used to being a hero, but now he felt like a zero. 2 cold Christmases came and went. As time passed, Frank became increasingly worried about his father. Sometimes he would find the man sitting alone in an armchair staring into space. Often Dad wouldn't leave the flat they lived in for days. No one beat their horns anymore when they walked down the street, and now they couldn't afford to go to the pie and mash shop, let alone be given double helpings. On Frank's 11th birthday, Dad bought his son a huge race car set. The boy loved it. It was the best toy ever. Dad even painted one of the miniature minis with a Union Jack so it looked just like Queenie. Together they would play with it late into the night, reenacting Dad's famous victories on the track. However, as much as he loved it, Frank worried where his father, who'd been unemployed now for a couple of years, had got the money from to buy it. Frank knew that very few children had toys like these. Race car sets cost hundreds of pounds, and Dad didn't have hundreds of pounds. Soon after Frank's birthday, groups of hard-faced men started banging on the door of the flat. Thud, thud, thud. They would wave pieces of paper and bark about unpaid debts. Then they would push past Frank and force their way in. Once inside, the men would pick up anything they thought might be worth something and march out with it. First it was the TV, then it was the sofa, then it was the boys' bunk bed. One time Frank wouldn't answer the door and they simply smashed it off its hinges. That day they took the toy race car track. After these visits, Dad would become full of sorrow. A look of despair would cross his face and he would sit in silence. Frank would do his best to cheer up his sad dad.
"Don't be down, Dad,"
the boy would say.
"I'll get our stuff back one day, I promise. When I'm grown up, I'll become a racing driver just like you."
Come here, son, and give us a huggle. The pair would embrace and everything would feel all right again. They may have been poor, but Frank never felt poor in his heart. The boy didn't mind that his jumpers had so many holes in them, they were more whole than the jumper. He never cared that he had to carry his books to school in a plastic bag that always broke. Soon it became normal that they had just one working light bulb in the flat and they had to move it from room to room at night. That is because the boy had the best dad in the world, or so he thought.
Chapter 5. Top Secret.
One night, over a dinner of cold baked beans in their cold flat, Dad made an announcement. Everything is about to change. A concerned look crossed Frank's face. Despite having nothing, the boy liked things just the way they were. Dad rested his hand on his son's shoulder. It's nothing to worry about, mate. Everything is about to change for the better.
But how?
Our life is about to change. I've got a job.
Brilliant, Dad. I'm so happy for you.
I'm happy too, replied the man, though somehow he didn't look it.
What's the job?
Driving,
Banger racing?
asked Frank excitedly. No, said Dad. He gathered his thoughts. But I will be driving fast. Very fast.
Whoa!
The boy's eyes lit up like headlights on a motor car. Yeah, whoa. And I will be earning money, lots of money. We can get the TV back.
The TV is boring. I like listening to all your racing stories.
All right then, mate. We can get the sofa back. The boy thought for a moment. It wasn't comfortable eating dinner sitting on a wooden crate.
I don't mind the splinters in my bottom, really.
Really? Asked Dad with a chuckle. As the man laughed, he rocked back and forth on the crate. Ouch! I've got another one.
Haha.
All right, all right. I know what you really want back.
What?
Your race car set. The boy fell silent. He did miss that toy very much.
I guess, Dad.
I'm really sorry they took that away, mate.
Don't worry, Dad.
Frank could tell something was up with his father. He just couldn't tell what. What was this mysterious job?
So what will you be driving, Dad? Race cars?
No, this is driving just as fast but on real roads.
Ambulances?
No,
Fire engines?
no. The boy's eyes widened.
Not for the police.
Dad managed to nod and shake his head at the same time. That sort of thing, yeah. The boy's brain braked.
Dad, what do you mean that sort of thing?
Well, it's top secret,
Tell me.
demanded the boy. It wouldn't be top secret if I told you.
Well, it would be very nearly top secret.
I can't, mate. Sorry, but I am going to get paid. Big money, really big money. And we are going to have stuff, lots and lots of stuff. New trainers, toys, computer games, whatever you want. Frank watched with concern as his dad's eyes widened. It all sounded too good to be true.
But I don't need lots of stuff, Dad. All I need is you.
This burst Dad's balloon. Yeah, don't you worry, I'll be here. I ain't going anywhere.
You promise?
Yeah, I promise, mate,
And you aren't going to get hurt?
asked the boy. The last thing he wanted was for his dad to lose his left leg. Promise, said Dad. He held up 3 fingers on his right hand. Scout's honour, haha.
You were never a scout.
It don't matter. Now finish up those baked beans. I need you to go to bed. Like all children in the world, Frank knew exactly what time his bedtime was, and it wasn't now,
But it's not my bedtime yet.
he protested. By the time you're ready for bed, it will be. That logic, although sound, was deeply annoying.
Not fair. Why do I have to go to bed now?
Auntie Flip will be here any minute to look after you,
Oh no.
replied Frank. Don't be like that. She's the only family we've got. And best of all, she is always up for babysitting.
I'm not a baby.
I know that, mate.
And why is it called babysitting? You mustn't sit on babies.
Ha, Dad laughed. I dunno.
Where are you guys going anyway?
I just have to pop out for a meeting at the boozer.
Can I come, Dad?
No.
Please?
pleaded the boy. No, this is grown-up stuff. Kids aren't allowed down the boozer anyhow.
But I want to come.
Sorry, mate, you can't. Now come on, give us a huggle. Tonight the huggle was tighter than usual. Dad always held his son a little tighter when he was feeling worried about something. Frank wasn't stupid. The boy knew something was up. He just didn't know what yet.
Chapter 6. The Smell of Old Books.
Auntie Flip wasn't Frank's aunt. She was Dad's aunt. Flip was short for Philippa, and she prided herself on being from the posh side of the family, even though there wasn't one. The lady had the smell of old books about her. That was probably because she was a librarian. Auntie Flip wore glasses with glass thicker than in a shark's tank. Her idea of an evening's entertainment was to bring a stack of her own unpublished poetry books over and read them out loud to the boy. Auntie Flip had written many volumes of poetry. Odes to a Puddle,
Words on the Wind,
rhymes about hand cream,
Leaves, Leaves and More Leaves,
crochet,
101 Poems about Thimbles,
lavender, an appreciation in verse,
The Joys of Quiche,
songs of hill walking,
Mints,
verses on vases,
Comfortable Shoes and other poems about sensible footwear,
the poetry of church bells,
Splishy Splash Splosh, Bath Time in Rhyme,
1,000 poems on wildflowers and weeds,
Poems for the Older Lady,
more poems for the older lady.
Yet Poems for the Older Lady.
That's enough poems for the older lady now.
Sorry, one last poem for the older lady.
Frank hated poetry. Flip would read him her poems about clouds and gooseberries and rainy days and birdsong and talcum powder. For Frank, listening to them was torture. That night the boy was annoyed that he was left alone with the woman while his dad went out for his really exciting, top secret, couldn't even tell his own son meeting. Doing what he was told, Frank put his pyjamas on and then popped his head round the door of the living room.
Good night, Auntie Flip,
he said quickly before turning to go. Not yet it isn't, chirped the lady.
Sorry?
As a very special treat, young man, I'm going to let you stay up late.
Cool,
exclaimed the boy. Yes, you can stay up late so I can read you some more of my poetry. This was definitely not cool. I know how much you like it, she said.
I'm really tired,
lied Frank, pretending to yawn, and he stretched his arms out for good measure. You won't be in a moment, young man, because I have a surprise for you. Do you like surprises?
It depends. What is it?
If I told you, it wouldn't be a surprise, replied Auntie Flip. The boy thought for a moment.
Is it a poetry-based surprise?
Yes! How did you know?
It was just a wild guess,
sighed Frank. The lady clicked open her handbag and took out her leather-bound notebook. She held it in her hands as if it was a holy relic. Carefully she turned the first page. The first one this evening is a poem I wrote about you, Frank. Somehow the thought of a poem about himself made Frank squirm. It was a similar feeling of unease as the time when Frank ate some sausages in the school canteen that hadn't been cooked properly, and he had to run to the toilet as he could feel his bottom was about to explode. Auntie Flip started making strange sounds with her mouth. It was like the noise of a braying horse.
Nay! Nay!
Next, she began making humming noises in an ear-achingly high-pitched tone. It was like someone running their fingers around the rim of a glass.
Wee-wah, wee-wah, wee-wah.
Frank put his fingers in his ears.
Is this the poem?
He shouted over the din. Flip looked at the boy as if he was bonkers. No! I'm just warming up the voice. Right, I am ready. This one is entitled simply Frank, and it is by me. My lovely little Frank, I want to say thank you for being you, the super-duper son of my only nephew. You are a boy who spreads joy like a butterfly who dances on the breeze, or a hummingbird singing in the trees, or a dolphin leaping through the sea, or a bee buzzing with another bee. You bring happiness to my heart like a freshly baked apple tart, with lashings of piping hot custard, much nicer than adding some mustard. I know it is strange to mention mustard, but it's the only thing that rhymes with custard. Please, oh Frank, don't ever get old. Stay forever young and bold. So my poem draws to a close. One last thing. Don't pick your nose. The lady's eyes were glistening with tears at the sheer beauty of her own poem. Well? She asked through sniffs. Her eyes searched Frank's face for approval.
Well, what?
Asked the boy. Well, what did you think of your special poem?
I thought the poem was very...
Yes? Frank was old enough to know sometimes you have to tell a little lie to save other people's feelings.
Poetic. It was a very poetic poem.
The lady was overjoyed. Thank you so much. That is high praise. Any poet wants their poems to be poetic. So 1 down, 99 to go.
I need to go to bed.
Are you sure?
Absolutely. I need to go to bed right now.
How about I read to you A Love of Mauve?
I would love to hear it, but...
Or some lines on my foot cheese?
I really couldn't.
You are going to adore Ode to a Puddle. Plop, plop, plop. The rain goes plop.
No! I mean, no.
The lady looked hurt. What do you mean, no?
I mean, thank you, but no. I just feel so emotional after listening to that beautiful one you wrote about me.
Auntie Flip nodded her head. Of course, of course. I forget the raw power of my verse. I bid you good night. The lady opened her arms to give the boy a hug. Reluctantly, the boy paced towards her. She always squeezed him too tight.
Ugh,
said Frank as he could feel the air being squashed out of him. Sorry, said Auntie Flip. I am not good with hugs. The lady had never been married, nor to Frank's knowledge even had a romance. He guessed she hadn't had many hugs in her life.
good night,
said the boy.
I am off to sleep now.
That was another lie. A big lie.
Big. Chapter 7. Death by Poetry.
Escaping from the flat was something Frank had done many times before. Years ago, Frank would sneak past his mum every Saturday night to watch his father race. Back then it was easy. Frank would prop up his pillows on his bed under the duvet. That way, if Mum bothered to get off the phone and poke her head around the door, she would think her son was lying there fast asleep. Now there were no pillows, duvet, or indeed bed. Since the hard-faced men had come, the boy had slept on an old lilo that always deflated during the night like a long, slow trump. Frank had to come up with a new plan, and fast. If he was forced to listen to one more of Auntie Flip's poems, there was a very real danger that he would spontaneously combust. The boy made a life-size dummy of himself by stuffing scrunched-up newspapers into some old pajamas. Next, he placed the dummy on top of his lilo. Finally, Frank had to pick his moment to make his escape out through the front door. From his bedroom he could hear that, surprise, surprise, Auntie Flip was composing a new poem in the living room. She was reciting it out loud as she wrote, "O tall proud tree, I see much of you in me. Although I don't have leaves, or branches for that matter, and I am not made of wood, but other than that I could be a tree, and oh yes, I don't have bark." Oh dear, let me start again. "Oh, tall, proud tree." The living room was at the end of the hall, so there was every chance Auntie Flip would see Frank if he tried to make a dash for the front door. After a short while, the boy could hear the lady shuffle down the corridor. This was his chance. Frank opened his bedroom door a tiny bit and put his eyeball up to the crack. Auntie Flip was closing the toilet door behind her. Click. "Oh no, the debt collectors have taken the Lucy too," Frank heard her exclaim. "I will have to hover." There was no way of Frank knowing if it was a number 1 or a number 2. How could he know? Such a thing was a private matter between Auntie Flip and Auntie Flip's bottom. A number 2 could take a long time, for some people hours, even days, whereas a number 1 could be over in seconds. So Frank scuttled across the floorboards as quickly as he could. The hard-faced men had taken the carpet too, towards the front door. There he planned to wait for the noise of the flush to cover his escape. Disaster! The toilet door opened again. Click. "I don't believe it! No loo roll!" muttered Auntie Flip to herself. Frank was crouched in the hallway, but scuttled back to his bedroom just in time. With her bloomers still round her ankles, Auntie Flip scampered sideways like a crab back to the living room. "Now, which poem can I sacrifice?" she asked herself. "They are all masterpieces. Let me see. Oh yes, Ode to the Poached Egg can go." The boy then heard a page being torn out of the book. Rip. Flip then scuttled back to the toilet and closed the door. Click. Frank crawled back to the front door and waited for the sound of the toilet flush. Clunk. Flip pulled the chain, but nothing happened. Clunk. Again, nothing. Clunk, clunk, clink. "Oh, goodness me, the chain snapped!" she exclaimed. The boy then heard effort noises coming from behind the toilet door. "I'll just have to hook my bloomers over the lever." Flush! Success! Frank opened the front door and shut it behind him as quietly as he could. Clunk. The lift was always broken in the block of flats, which was a pain when you lived on the 99th floor. Fortunately, Frank had devised a cool way of getting down the seemingly endless staircase. He'd found an old laundry basket, and with felt-tip pens had painted it with the colours of Queenie, red, white, and blue. All he had to do was sit at the top of the staircase and then let gravity take its course. Whoosh!